It's saying an error occurred.
I had this. I just had a message. This
Here we
stream
go.
is
All right.
live.
We are live. Welcome, folks, to this week's edition of Tech Sales Advice. I am, of course, your host, Chris White, and this is the LinkedIn Live program for technical sales professionals and technical sales leaders. And folks, as I like to say, these are live conversations. If you're wondering if this was recorded earlier in the week or last week, a resounding no. These conversations are always live, as I like to say. They are, by design, unscripted, unrehearsed, and unpredictable. And I'm particularly excited for today's guest. I'm particularly excited for today's conversation. He happens to be a former client of mine. So he worked with an organization that brought me in to do some training for their teams. And then late last year, he reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, Chris, I'm writing a book. Do you mind if I reference your book in my book?" And I said, "Of course not. And oh, by the way, do you mind sending me a copy? I'd love to give it a read." And I can say to him what I've had a lot of people say to me, which is, I literally couldn't put it down. I read the book in 24 hours. That book is called The Presales Navigation System. It is a fabulous book. It is a fantastic read. And Dmitri, in the book, he talks a lot about structure. He talks about deal management. And so we're going to be talking about the sort of the two sides of an interesting conversation. I talk a lot about skills. He talks a little bit more about structure. And I think there's some interesting synergies here. That was a long-winded introduction, Dmitri. Thank you for being here, sir. How are you doing?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you for a great introduction. You're too kind. But yes, no, I appreciate your input in the book, and Chris kind of was humble there. Not only he read the book, he gave me such a great feedback, which shifted a lot of things in my head, and uh, definitely a mentor and a guide in writing this book and then rewriting the book.
Well,
Um, thank you, really appreciate it.
not nice for you to say. And I sincerely love the book. And one of the things that I love about the book, Dmitri, and I've told you this, is because you and I talk about certainly some similar things, but we come at it from a very different perspective. And that's what I want to begin to unpack a little bit. And you know, I I I talk a lot about skills. I mean, you know firsthand, SE leaders hire me to run skills training and skills development workshops. You talk more about deal management and structure. And before we get in even to that, you know, one of the observations that I've made is that organizations or teams that have good skills don't always win deals. So why don't we start there? What is it? What is it that happens that people with the right skill set don't always, quote, win deals or manage deals the way they might expect?
Right. No, that's that's exactly it, right? So technically, you think about it is, so theoretically speaking, every organization that you trained should never lose a deal, right?
In
It's
theory, right?
in theory, right? So they now everybody got skills, so using those skills, and you should never lose. But right, it's, I think, and I think, and in the title of this, we also mentioned like, hey, you know what? Why do strong SEs also lose, right? But I think there is a significant difference, right? So the weak SEs, or like beginners, right? We all been there, and even experienced SEs, we make mistakes, but it usually lose. This loss is for visible reasons, right? So
Mm,
the discovery wasn't deep enough, the demo didn't land, the stakeholders wasn't handled well. Usually like pinpoint to the breakdown, right? So the strongest Cs, when they lose, it's different because the deal looks healthy, the
mm,
relationship is in place, there's a momentum, there's activity, and yet, something stays, unchecked, unexamined, right? Not ignored, just but assumed,
mm,
and it usually doesn't show up early. It shows up late, right? and
mm,
and when it does, it feels like a surprise, even though it probably wasn't. that's where I start noticing something subtle happening inside strong deals with the strong SEs with the strong skills. And that's really where the idea of this drift started for me, which then kind of was the foundation for all the frameworks and the system and the book, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you use the word drift. And by the way, I happen to be a boater as well. So, I love the nautical angle. And we'll talk a little bit about when you say compass, when you say sail, when you say anchor, what are some of the things you're talking about?
Mhm.
But you mentioned drift, and this is a term you've used with me in a number of conversations that we've had, and you really helped open my eyes to this idea that deals tend to drift. And I think what's interesting about it is, and even turning it back to a nautical term or in a nautical sense, often drift isn't obvious, right?
Mhm.
You're just sort of you're in the water and everything seems fine, and particularly if you're far away from the shore, things don't look like they're changing all that much. But then all of a sudden you sort of take your eye off the ball and you look up again and you realize, well, wait a minute, something's gone wrong here.
All right.
Let's talk about this idea of drift. How is it that drift, quote unquote, drift happens inside of deals?
Right. And it's funny, drift happens like in almost every state. Can happen, not happens, but can happen, and often does happen in pretty much every stage of the deal, right?
Mm.
So the whole idea of the drift initially started when I was at the sandbar throwing the anchor, and the barbecue is on, and I'm with the friends and everything else is great. And then I look around, like notice we're drifting, and because I didn't check if the anchor was really holding up. But that
Mm.
is when I'm actually trying to stay in place. But there is other type of drift, right? When you're actually there is emotion. So like the momentum basically replaces clarity when the deal is keeps moving, meeting happens, everyone's happy, everyone nods, everyone is engaged, even POC starts. But
Mm.
then you zoom out and ask, are we actually reducing any ambiguity? The answer is often not really, right?
Mm.
And then, but the biggest issue there that it actually feels productive. That's why it's so dangerous. This type
Mm.
of drift is so dangerous because nothing looks broken, but the deal isn't getting tighter. It's just getting bigger, and not in a good sense, right? Like we all
Mm.
like when the deal grows, but it's a different type of the deal getting bigger. But there is there is an activity which does not translate into progress because there is no defined and agreed upon rule what qualifies as advancement, right?
Mm. That's really good. If I can just reflect for a moment, two of the things you said that I just jotted down. The first is momentum overcomes clarity. So,
Mhm.
in other words, we're moving forward, or at least it feels like we're moving forward, but without that clarity, maybe we're moving forward in the wrong direction. The
Yeah.
other thing you said is activity feels like progress.
Hmm.
And to what I'm hearing you say is let's not confuse activity with progress.
Hmm.
So how
Right.
does this happen? I mean, again, whether they've been through a program like mine or one of the many other sales training programs out there, or maybe they're just a good team. They're well coached. They have the right skills. Why and how does this drift tend to happen?
Right. And it's funny, right? Actually, that if you think about it, everything that I just said and you said, it's nothing new, right? And it's probably like many people that are listening to this thinking like, well, I know that. So and then the question comes back again, like if we all know that, why the hell this is happening and why the deals are drifting, why are we still losing, right? And
Mm.
and and this is when it's not about how what kind of skills and how strong those skills are. It's about how do we inspect the deals. and and when I say inspect, I'm not necessarily talking about the leadership inspecting the deals, even though that's part of it, but even you know the field players, the AE and SEs, how do they inspect the deal? and how the leadership plays biggest role in that, in some areas specifically, and we probably will talk about it later too. But usually when you inspect it right, there are small, it's like they're small signals, and that maybe even each of those signals doesn't really tell you much. But like, let's say, the next steps that really don't unlock any decisions or don't reduce any risks. And next step. So the meeting ends and people go like, hey, uh, are there any next steps? Yes, there is. We're going to have another meeting and we're going to have a deep dive. Great. That's progress. It is not,
Mm,
unless you actually say, we're going to have a deep dive. And by doing the deep dive, our plan is to remove this ambiguity or reduce this risk or enable them to make this decision.
mm,
Then it's really a progress. Then there are POC that actually expand scope instead of narrowing it, right?
mm.
How often does this happen, right? How many POC conversations are like I've been dragged into, or new stakeholders are appearing, but no one's redefining success criteria.
Yeah,
So how did, like, why are those people here now?
yeah,
And what's their goal? What's their pain? And
yeah.
and the forecast, and I think my favorite is and this happens way too often, is when you actually, especially from the leadership position, it's you often observe how forecast confidence grows up without any evidence being
Mm,
created. It's just because we had so many activities and they're still going on and we have a great traction. We get customer stays engaged. So
so
the
it
confidence,
must be moving forward. They haven't told us no yet, so it must be moving forward,
right,
right?
right, yes. So, and I think those are, and there are many more, but I think, and this is why it becomes super important. Like and I'm not sure, like I just couldn't come up with the better word than inspection, but because there was a lot of um, you know bad inspections happening there, and somebody might have a bad taste about it. But I'm talking about the deal inspection when you're looking at your deal from a different angle, and this is why I'm saying, then, you know what what I try to do, what I try to teach, is not necessarily that skill, and even not even how to use that skill, is how do you think inside the deal, and
Mm,
how you apply those skills inside the deal, by applying a thinking. And this is why, to what you just said, direction is the main thing, especially in the nautical thing, right? Like if you on a road, it's like, like all roads lead to Rome, right? At least you're gonna get to Rome. In the sea or in the ocean,
mm,
there are no roads,
yeah,
and you better know your direction if you don't want to get lost, right?
yeah.
So before you start your sail, you need to make sure you set up direction, and you validate and check it and stress test it.
So many questions and so many thoughts are flooding my mind. And before I ask my next question, let me just pause for a moment, folks. If we don't know who's out there, we never know who's out there. So if we do have anybody out there who cares to ask Dmitri or myself a question, in particular Dmitri, he's the star of this show. Or if you have any comments to share, please feel free to share. So Dmitri, a thought that's coming to mind for me is, what if someone were to be listening to this right now, or maybe they catch the recording, and they find themselves thinking, well, this sounds more like the AE's job than my
Mm,
job. Why
mm,
why is this my job to worry about direction or the deal from a management perspective? What would you say to that person?
mm. Right. Well, it's funny. It does come up often, right? And very often it's due to, again, the lack of the what we call now operating system. By the way, that's probably, out of all the buzzwords out there, this one actually makes more sense to me, because it's truly the operating system you install and
Mm,
maintain, right, and patch when necessary. So, but I think it comes from that, and often the AEs passes um, the flag to the SE to say like, hey, now it's time to do technical validation. So the flag is yours.
mm,
And then in return, the SE completes the technical validation with 100% success and hands it back and say, now it is all yours.
mm,
And I think this is the most dysfunctional families that are out there, right? And being in the field, I think my most successful relationship with AEs were when the AEs would never skip a POC call. They're
Mm,
there. They are there to listen to signals that they need. They're there to find out the information that they need. And the SE, myself, wouldn't never skip any conversation around business, any conversation with economic buyer, or even with procurement, right?
mm,
But it's when you can talk about there is extreme the extreme ownership, obviously, term out there. But I think what's been highly undervalued now, the power of the sales engineering inside the deal,
mm,
how much control we actually have while we are discovering, qualifying, validating, and discovering again, and requalifying, and revalidating. There is it's very very important, and I think it's the way we the company I worked with before at Zerto, we had this term of the technical owner of the
mm,
account, the technical owner of the opportunity, because the ownership is not like you basically, on the one hand, we often go and say everyone should stop treating pre-sales as a resource, as the demo people, or like, hey, here's my tech guy, he's gonna show you how it works. But on the other hand, we often don't take enough ownership, and that ownership is like if you think about the touch point with the number of touch points that are happening throughout the deal, and then you qualify those touch points as a most to least impactful, you will find an interesting fact that the SEs probably have most of the highly impactful touch points,
mm,
and not using it. And I don't know, it's basically it's funny, it sounds a lot, as even as I'm saying it sounds a lot, but it's really isn't. It's you doing the same things, like just simply, instead of providing answers or just providing answers, ask smart questions, right?
mm,
And that again, nothing new. It's a soft skill that you teach. Let's say probe, right? So it's somebody now has this skill, this amazing skill. It's one of my favorite ones, and I like the word probe when you continuously probing things. But then suddenly, when it comes down to hearing something that you really like, when you discover you learn something and you like what you learned, and you immediately assume this because you just like it.
mm,
You don't challenge it by probing more, right?
mm,
You don't stress test it by asking deeper questions, and you're not validating it. You're just grabbing this assumption because you like it, and you're going with that. But it's hard to blame anyone. It's typically because, as I said, because there is no defined system on how you qualify, on how you work organization wide, on what's considered to be a progress, on what's considered to be risk, etc., etc. And
yeah,
this is why you see some great SEs, heroics are there, right? It works.
yeah.
It just doesn't scale.
There's a few thoughts coming to mind for me, and maybe this will be helpful. First of all, I'm an analogy guy, and
Mm,
most people know I'm also a sports guy, and I love sports analogies. And the
mm,
analogy that's coming to mind for me, and pick whatever sport you like, whether it's basketball or soccer, or at least what Americans call soccer, what the rest of the world calls football. It's like, it's one thing to have a great set of individual skills, whether that's
mm,
dribbling, shooting, passing, playing defense, whatever. But the question is are you participating as part of the team and doing what you need to do to make sure that the team wins, and taking ownership of your role in the team, and in this case the deal victory? Is
mm.
that a fair analogy?
Yeah, no, I 100%. This is exactly it. Like it's a collection of individually highly skilled players, or whatever sport you like, is not necessarily a great team.
Right.
and the vice versa. You know, good enough players which know exactly how to play, and they have a systems that's it's kind of it, Ted Lasso, right? How Nathan creates this great place, and then suddenly even mediocre players now become strong teammates and well executed, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's exactly it. But I think another analogy I like, and I think you used it in one of our conversation, what Mike Tyson said also, that everyone has a plan until he
Punch
or
in the
she
nose.
gets punched in the nose, right? And that is another thing. And when you teach skills and everybody endorse it, under stress, we all tend to go back to what's comfortable, what we used to do, right? And that is a lot. That's on a leadership. This is when the
Mhm.
leadership needs to maintain it, maintain the operating system, right? You cannot leave it on its own. So
Yeah.
yeah, you need to learn how to manage the rest of the fight when you get punched in the nose.
Yeah. No, it's really good. Another thing that I wrote down is system over individual heroics. And
Hmm.
and again, if I look at the type of work that I do, I tend to focus. I mean, I focus on skills, and certainly we talk about teamwork and collaborative discovery and presenting the united front to the customer, right? So there's certainly some of this in there, but you're adding a layer. I think, and you've summed it up so beautifully well here in this book. Is you're really talking about a layer of organization and structure that A amplifies skills, and B, maybe if you have some team members who don't necessarily have all the rock star skills, that the system will still position them for success. Dmitri, let me just push our own pause button just for a moment. Justin Hammond said he made a point, and this was quite a bit earlier. How is the customer evaluating which situation or solution is best, and what are the metrics they're using? What do they need to see to prove which one is best? Well said. And then Joe Beaubien, nice to see you, Joe. He says, couldn't agree more. Full immersion from both sides is required to run a successful sales cycle. Joe, nice to see you. Thanks for the comment. And I think that's really what we're talking about here. And you use the term extreme ownership. Is ownership. It's really the SEs feeling and accepting a state an ownership stake in the success of the deal. And once they accept that ownership, then it's executing in a certain way. So let's take that next step and talk about the execution. Let's talk about the how. Now, you have framed in the book, you have framed the how around three core ideas, three cornerstone principles that fit beautifully with this idea of a navigation system. Can I invite you to talk through those three core principles?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think it's for a lot of viewers and listeners, they kind of realize it's all nautical now. And when I say compass, sail, and anchor, they could probably already connect the dots. So, and you guys and girls are not wrong. So this is exactly what it stands for. Compass is for your direction, right? And this is literally when it's clarity over momentum, right? And then there are abbreviation for each of those letters. We're not gonna go into details for this. And then sail is a true momentum. Now, only after you have a good sense of direction, you know exactly where you're going, and now it's a momentum. You know how to maintain this momentum, and then anchor is a stability of your deal to make sure it doesn't drift away. The POC doesn't get expanding, and it's so like say if I would say that today, especially for on the pre-sale side, the sales side of the business have, and they have it for having it for a number of years. There are methodologies, right? There's Medpic, there is Challenger, there are others. So they already learn. It's a common language. They learn it, and they when the forecast review happens on a sales side, it's more or less kind of framed already. On a pre-sale side, what I often seen when I was talking to different organizations, It's pretty much like, how is it going? Do we feel good? Do we have next? What's next? How's that POC going? Like, are we progressing? Do they like it? So, and that is asking for drift, right? This is not the level of inspection that you want from the leader. So,
Mm,
if you apply the compass, then you would ask something like, what must be true for this deal to close safely, right?
mm,
And then you let that set question seed, because that kind of, it's forcing clarity. It's forcing team to, now suddenly I have to think of, wait a second, what decisions are we actually driving toward? Not your decision, the customer decision. What decision we are actually driving towards? What assumptions are we making? And what has been discussed versus actually validated, right?
mm,
Again, it's
mm.
it's basically,
Really good.
we yeah, but if we make these assumptions early in a stage and let it sit there until late, this is when we get surprises at the end, where which shouldn't wasn't really surprises, because there was there were signs all over, there were signals. And if you have the system and you know how to inspect your own deals, and the leadership, consistent in actually practicing it, then you asking this sort of questions, and suddenly your next steps become much sharper,
Mm,
and the deals actually start converging. And how many, I almost want to say, like, those who actually, those in a room that have, close to 100% of technical win rate and roughly about 50% of close rate, raise your hand. Right. So right, so this is often, what happens. And some organizations are better than this, and some organizations did, uh, kind of employ some sort of, operating system. And I've been in an organization which pre-sales would adopt the sales methodology like MEDDIC, and kind of at least, learn the same language. But the sense of ownership and the sense of inspecting deals within the frameworks which are specific to pre-sales, almost never there, right? And so this is compass, and the compass will get you this direction. Now you asked all the right questions, and then suddenly, um, it creates a next issue, because now you have to validate properly. Like, if you start, if you lay down your direction properly, now you have to validate properly. Again, you need the framework. Like, say, again, talking of POCs, most POCs feel productive, right? So there's movement, the customer is engaged, and if you ask what doubt this POC designed to remove, this is where the hesitation comes.
mm,
And like, if you have anybody who has a running POC right now, ask yourself a question: what doubt am I removing by
mm,
providing this POC? And it's uncomfortable. You're gonna think like, this is a stupid question, I don't want to answer that. That means it's landed. That's by design. It's gonna make you feel uncomfortable, but if you think about it, it will actually open um, a whole set of questions that follow. And and you think the POC should narrow ambiguity, but often it's actually expands the scope. So when your scope is expanding, that's already a great sign to think of, like, am I actually designing this POC to remove any doubts or risks?
mm. Or are we
Or,
introducing more doubt and risk?
right, or is it designed for me to show the capability of the product, which I think are gonna help the customer to remove their pain?
Mm.
But it should be a doubt. And I might gonna, at the risk of becoming unpopular, I'll
That's
tell
all
you
right.
one.
That's all right.
I'll,
Be
r-
unpopular.
right. So I'm not against POCs, right? But only if, and that's the risk. I treat POC, and many people say POC is a closing tool. I would take it step further. I would say POC, for me, I always treated POC as an exit strategy.
Mm,
I exit one way or the other, but I need to exit. The first POC I adopted in one of the companies I started with, before I got to it was already running for 2 years on and off, you
Mm.
know. So because there was no because it wasn't treated as an exit strategy, not an exit tool. But to me, it's an exit tool, and you design this exit tool to either remove this doubt or risk, or help to make a decision, or help you to exit the deal early to say, no, Mr. Customer or Mrs. Customer, we cannot meet this criteria. And I often, like, I'm also an allergy guy, and I just recently I used this example when I was talking to one of my mentees, and I said, think of it as the office chair, right? And say, somebody, you selling office chair, somebody come and say, one of the hard requirement for me to have a green armrests, because I like green. It goes well with my interior. My desk is green. I don't want the whole chair to be green, but I want my handles to be green. So you can say what I call a weak yes, to say, well, I can probably paint it green for you, or go back to my manufacturer and ask if they can make those armrests green. Or you can say, no, unfortunately, our handles actually match the color of the chair. However, those are ergonomic armrests, which are dynamically adjusted based on the weight you put on it, which helps our customer to remove tensions from the shoulder and get rid of the chronic neck pain. Like, I would rather take the strong no and say, the hell with the green. I really like this idea, because after 8 hours sitting in this chair, I feel my neck. And if it helps me to reduce the tension from the shoulders, then, and by the way, when I told him this example, I thought I should patent this idea.
So what you're saying is it's better to speak truth than it is to, and I can't remember exactly the term you used, but basically a weak yes, or a half yes is what you're saying here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is all about building trust, and I know this is also probably unpopular in a lot of sales cultures, when this is the idea, is to always say yes. Um, but there is room for no, right? And this is not like a pushback, and this is the truth. And that pretty much almost the part of the anchor, right? You stick to your guns, and you don't stretch the truth. You it this is weak, and the weak yes always loses, because there is always somebody with a stronger yes. Because guess what? There's probably someone who already has these chairs with the green armrests. Right? And if this is truly, if you don't care about the shoulders, you don't care about your neck, you just need a green, I can even help the customer to say, you know what? I know manufacturer B who makes a great uh, uh, colored armrests. So I highly recommend you reach out to them.
Yeah. Yeah. I love, I mean, I love that quote. A weak yes always loses. I mean, that is a quotable quote. Dmitri, let me just push our pause button just for a moment. Folks, I'm speaking to Dmitri Lee. He is the author of the Presales Navigation System. We're talking about structure versus skills. For those of you who more than likely know me and what I do, I spend a lot of time running workshops, helping people develop the skills. And what we're discussing is the fact that in spite of having an elevated level of skill set, we still lose deals. And why is that? And Dmitri introduced this idea of deal drift, that they tend to drift and oftentimes unseen until the late stages of a deal. And there's three core pillars of his approach and his framework. And they are the compass, and the compass is gaining clarity before momentum. The second is the sail, and that's the momentum to carry through on a deal. And then the third is anchor, that keeps you anchored in truth and stable in the rough waters. There's something I want to double back on, Dmitri, because you said this, and I want to make sure it's not lost on people, because this felt like a really powerful statement. We were talking about compass. We were talking about clarity, and you said early on that oftentimes the questions that are being asked, and maybe it's the questions that the sales engineer is asking, maybe it's the questions that SE leadership is asking, oftentimes create drift. They're enabling drift, because we're asking questions designed to make us feel good about the deal, but aren't actually exposing clarity on the deal. I want to make, and one of the examples that you gave is, are topics being discussed, or are topics being validated, or are questions being discussed, or are questions being validated? I just felt like that was such a poignant moment there. I do have one question related to that. Every account executive I've ever worked on, or worked with rather, would prioritize momentum and speed over anything and everything else.
Right.
So how do we as sales engineers slow things down so that, to ensure that we're moving in the right direction, to ensure that our compass is set right before we get all worked up around, quote, momentum, without coming across like we're being deal roadblocks?
Yeah. No, you're right. And, that's so true too. Is the momentum is the most important thing for a lot of sales folk there.
And I mean, they will do anything to move deals quickly, right?
And this is great. No, and
as they should.
Exactly. And there's nothing wrong with that. And we all should, shoot towards that. But only if we know exact direction, and if we, the most successful sales reps I worked with, even though pushing for a momentum, would never say no to when you sit down with them. And again, you inspect the deal, you inspect it together. This is why the deal labs of the deal labs portion of the training is I always like, or almost, almost make it a soft requirement for the sales rep to be available during that training too, because that's supposed to create that motion, continuous motion of the team to do a deal review. And very few would actually say that makes no sense. They all like to move fast, but not in all the different directions though, right? Well, some do, but most like to win the most. So early in my career, I had number of conversations with the sales reps when I would tell them, when they would ask for, like, Dmitri, we got to do this. And I would sit down and I say, sure, we can either do this right now quickly, or we can win the deal. Because what we're gonna do right now is not gonna bring us any closer to winning. It's a very reactive, and the customer asks us to show X, and us not using this opportunity, this brilliant momentum, to actually go and dig why. Mr. Customer, why do you want green armrests? Right? Is it really a hard requirement? So without actually doing this, it's waste of time. And again, like in speaking of sports, in any shooting sports, there is a term also: slow is smooth, smooth is fast, right? So when they pull the trigger, the slow is smooth, smooth is fast, and it's the same idea. Sometimes you need to slow down to win faster.
Amen to that. Yeah. When you found yourself saying, and the example you just gave is a powerful one, we can do that, or we can win the deal. I suspect there are some people who might hear this and think, yeah, that sounds good, but there's no way I could say something like that to my sales counterpart. So are there certain questions that maybe people could ask their account executives that would rather than being that, if I can use the word bold, would maybe help their account executives realize that, okay, maybe I'm getting ahead of my skis here. Maybe we are trying to move a little bit too fast, and maybe we should. What's an example of a question that an SE could ask that doesn't come off as assertive, if I can use that word?
Right. So I think it's even more. It's more than question, because here is, and that's normally, that's in everyday life. This is how it works too, right? If you come up with something and tells me, Dmitri, let's do this, and I tell you, no, Chris, I think we shouldn't do that. We should do something different. That is not a response, right? So when I said, when in that example, when I actually, like, I'm thinking of like specific example right now. When I told that rep, that's when I said, we can either do what you ask for, we can win the deal. That wasn't the end of sentence, because that was the continuation, was by we win this deal by doing what I propose. And here are the steps. We do this first, and that will allow us to uncover so and so. We do this second, and that will eliminate all our competition out of equation. And then we confirm this, and this will make us the project priority go up to a point when, even when the budget shifts, the deal is not going to be lost by budget is not available. And then we do that. And by the way, if we do it right, I think we can do it all in a cycle of 6 weeks. Are you okay with this plan? Because I can help you with that. And I haven't had a single person to say no. Usually they look at it and say, I like the idea. Let's go with that. And yeah, you can't just, when I say, this applies to the same thing. When you say no, you can't just say, no, we can't do it. Or you can't just say, that makes no sense, or like, this is a bad idea, right? Internally or externally, you should offer a solution. And the best way to offer this solution is if you have those frameworks, which are kind of binded into the operating system, and you get used to this, the mindset of this operating system when you're looking at all your deals. This mindset is contagious. Like, I can guarantee you, the moment you start thinking of deals that way, not only all your peers, SEs, will think that way, and that's part of the multiplication of the craft. This is part of the compass too. But also your sales partners. I hate when people say counterparts. I do say sometime too. But as your sales partners, as another P in your in your sales habits, your sales partner, very rarely looking at it, just will say, that makes no sense. They will actually appreciate it, and the result speaks to itself too. This is when your overall close rate. Right now, you go to different companies on a sales side, they will tell you, you got to build your pipeline, 5x, 6x, 10x, because based on a closing rate, this is what it is. Because let's be frank, there are a lot of those deals were hopcasting or under pressure, because people ask you, and people will tell you pipeline, which is true, and then the SEs would sit back and say, well, that's a pipeline, that's not my problem. Well, those days are gone. That's no longer the case. We're responsible for the pipeline. And guess what? The pipeline of expansion or renewal is mainly on the sales engineers. Right. So
it's well said. So I want to just take one half a step back. We've talked a fair amount about the compass and some questions that we as SEs can be asking our account executives, and questions that leaders can be asking of their SEs and the teams. We talked a little bit about anchor, and you gave an example of one of the ways in which we can apply this principle of anchor is avoiding the weak yes, and just standing by the truth and demonstrating the value of the truth. I feel like we skipped over momentum a little bit. What are some of the things? And there's one very specific word that's coming to mind, but I'm not going to share it just yet. What are some of the things that when you're actually working with either the teams that you're training and coaching, or the individuals that have worked for you in the past, what are some specific things that you encourage them to do in order to maintain and drive momentum?
So I would say, simply put, a structured validation, or like you can say basically evaluation that lowers ambiguity, because when validation doesn't reduce risk, confidence rises faster than evidence. And that is another this is another, like if you're in leadership, you can often see it just like that on a forecast calls, when you see, and you continuously, like on a weekly forecast calls, and you see the confidence rises and without any evidence. And this is when it start to feel the forecast feels good, but it's so fragile. So for the SEs, I think the best advice, or this is the best application of the sale. Again, if you missed all those great things that you should do in a compass, you might be sailing 200 miles a second in a wrong direction. That's not going to help. But if you know your direction, now to keep the momentum, you got to make sure that every next step removes ambiguity, removes risk, or helps customer to make a decision. It's literally, almost like step down and say, tomorrow you have a call with the customer, you have a deep dive technical call with the customer. You probably think right now, okay, so I got to demonstrate them this workflow. I got to demonstrate them on how they could use this to remove their pain point. They mentioned that they wanted to see the reporting. Oh man, do I have a great reports for them to show? Those are all great things to think of. But then step back and think. So during this demo, I know what I'm going to show, but my main goal is to remove this ambiguity, help them to make this decision, and or reduce risk. And I'm not talking about your risk of losing deal, right? Which is also important, but I'm talking about you helping them to remove risk to make this decision. Because it's interesting how many, like, you have to almost for a few seconds just think of as a buyer making decision, because we all do this on a personal level, right? I'm as a buyer, I'm buying a car, I'm making a decision, I'm going to the dealership, and if I have 4 kids, which I commute with all the time, and somebody sees that I really like that convertible, and they're gonna keep talking about this convertible, I'm probably gonna buy a minivan elsewhere, right? So you gotta be thinking on like, hey, these guys really like my solution, and every time I show them something, they applaud, and I show them, I took it, we did POC, they absolutely love this solution. But like I always say is if somebody gonna come over to my driveway and say, Dmitri, would you like to take this Ferrari down for a spin? I will say absolutely. And every single time I'll do it, I'll come back and say, I absolutely loved it, but I don't need it.
Right.
Right. So, and this is why it comes back to what you asked earlier, that what if somebody asked, but Dmitri, this is not my job to validate some of the things, but this is the proof why it is you own it, because you own the outcome. And will you do more or less work for more or less results depends on it. So it is your time, so you need to own it.
There's a couple things that I wrote down that are, I think are just so powerful. The first quotable quote, you said, confidence tends to rise faster than evidence. And when you say that, what you mean is the sales leadership, the executive leadership who are counting on forecasts, their confidence in deals tends to increase faster than the evidence that supports the confidence that they seem to have. And really, and this is my takeaway on momentum. It's really about, and we touched on this earlier, but this helped me stitch the two together. What we're really talking about here is progress over activity. And the way you know you're making progress and not just carrying out activities is that every next step is either removing ambiguity or removing risk for the customer. And I suppose either that or demonstrating how they can and proving that they can achieve what it is that they're trying to achieve. The key takeaway for me here is that every activity has a very intentional purpose. If every activity and every time we're investing time in something, right, in some engagement, some activity with the customer, there's a clear purpose. That's how we know that we are maintaining momentum and driving progress forward. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, but I will just add what you mentioned, like when you said, and possibly, also like we should demonstrate them how this solution can help them to resolve or address their business business need. Yes, you 100% got to do that, but on top of this, put like a little cherry. And this is why it's important to step back and think, okay, so I'm going to show this, and it's going to show them on how it's going to help them to do it. But it doesn't help that if it doesn't help them to make a decision to choose my product, then I need to add something else. So this, my next step should be, all right. And often you cannot do it blindsided. And as a part of the discovery, as a part of preparation for that next step. So like, let's say it's a demo, right? Like in your example, it's a demo. In that step, so first of all, and I couldn't stress it enough, and I pretty much mention it everywhere, every time the conversation about demo comes up, is it's interesting how people treat every meeting agendas so important, except for the demo call. Suddenly, there are no agenda. And it's just such a great way to continue your discovery by sending this agenda to a customer and say, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, here's what I'm planning to show you. Are you agreeing? Yes or no? And often when they respond back and say, well, this is not important. This is most important. This is priority one. You're also missing this. And this is like, if they actually scratch most of the things and people get upset, I'd be the most excited. Like, great, now we're getting the real, we're getting the reality check right here. So this is great. But also in that little thing, just to ask, what will help you after seeing this to make a decision internally? And it doesn't have to be in that words. It's just, you craft it based on what you know about customer, about the opportunity, about the product you sell, and everything else. So what would stop you from making a decision? And most important, and I know that many great leaders I worked with would go and ask this, what would be the cost of doing nothing? What if they do nothing? Right.
Yeah. So Dmitri, I want to push pause just one more time. Yeah, believe it or not, we're almost an hour into this conversation, which means we're going to wrap up here soon. So we've talked about this idea that even teams with elite skills, if they're not following what I would call best practices around demo or deal management, if they're not applying these principles of the compass, which is making sure you have clarity before momentum, sale, which is the momentum to carry through a deal, and that's really what we've said: progress over activity, and make sure all your activities have a very defined purpose. And then anchor, which is really how do you stabilize when things get difficult? And we know that sales is not a linear, it's not a linear motion, and there's going to be ups and downs. the final question I'd like to put on the table is, if you were speaking to an SE leader or an SE manager, what would you tell them that they can do to better guide their team members in applying these rules of clarity, momentum, and trust?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great question. It's because it's often starts and ends with the leadership, right? And this goes back to the the way we inspect the deals and the way we think inside of those deals. So for the leadership, is the most important part is to, and there are times when you need to kind of roll up your sleeve and step in and save the day, right? But
Mhm.
ideally, what you want to do is you want to create this culture of self-inspection and inspection of the deals. And this is usually how it goes. If you are field leader, especially if you're frontline SE manager, and when you do the deal inspection with with your SEs, and you ask the status, you just getting back a report, and that's what the SEs will provide. But if you actually expanding it and inspecting it in following these frameworks and say what must happen, what must be the truth for this deal to save closely,
Mm.
what is um, do you think what would create the drift for this
Mm.
opportunity? What should we uncover to prevent it? And what is, and instead of asking what is your next step, go deeper and say what should we do next to help them to make decision, help them to reduce the risk, to remove ambiguity, and etc. I mean, it goes well in detail. So this is why, doing the D labs, it's quite interesting when people adopt something like this and when they have system installed. And this is when the skills goes. By the way, without the skills, we go skills versus system. The structure. Without skills, it's like any operating system. There are prerequisites. For this operating system to be installed, you need to have, and skills are prerequisite. And without skills, it is pretty much useless.
Right.
But once the skills are in place and the system is deployed, it's interesting. During the D labs, you see like a first D lab. There is more intervention, and you step back and you ask them to step back. You the one asking the leading questions, and then starting the second and the third D lab, you realize how when it's get into the motion, and now it's a rhythm there, and they all start using the same language, but also same kind of thinking from both leadership and individual contributors. That's what put tears in my eyes, right? This is when you go like, yeah, now
It's
and
working.
and yeah, and it's working, and it's also now um, qualifying and disqualifying deals faster, which is, it's
Mm.
basically, I always say this is when your forecast becomes calm, and we all know calm forecast performs much better.
Amen.
Yeah,
So we do need to wrap things up
yeah,
here, Dmitri. My takeaway, and I absolutely love this, is SE leaders should be, quote, inspecting deals. And a big part of inspecting deals is not just asking the questions that might make us feel good, it's the questions that will expose potential drift. And the more we do so, a word that you used is culture. The more we as SE leaders are asking these types of questions that get to the heart of, do we have clarity? Are we doing things that build and maintain momentum? And are we doing the things that will manage the instability that goes with and leveraging, quote, the anchor? And when we do so, this becomes a culture of SEs asking the same questions of themselves and of the account executives.
right.
This has been such a great conversation, Dmitri. Thank you so much for being here, sir. I will make one final plug for the book. I think it's a great book. It's a great read. And I believe, certainly anybody who's read my book, and I think most of the people that tune into this have either read my book or been through one of my programs. I think this is a great read to build upon the skills that certainly I wrote about and talk about in the workshops that I run. Dmitri, as we're wrapping things up, any final thoughts from you, sir?
No, I just happy sailing, and make sure your compass is set straight. So, but yeah, no, good luck to all there, and yeah, if you guys and girls are have more questions, feel free to keep chatting at this. I guess we'll see the all the comments on this chat, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, well,
Yep.
I'll be more than happy to keep talking about it, because yeah, I didn't even realize how quickly this time.
It's amazing, right?
Yeah,
hour goes by quickly.
Right.
For those of you who hung around the whole time, folks, thank you so much. Enjoy having this opportunity to speak with you. If you caught the recording, I hope you enjoyed it as well. If you don't already, I'll invite you to follow hashtag Tech Sales Advice. And of course, you can always go to techsalesmastery.com to learn more about the work that I do. Dmitri, hang around backstage just for a minute so I can say a proper farewell. To the rest, I think I'll be back next week with a Tech Sales Advice. So we'll see you next week. Have a good weekend, all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.